She used to speak, not with voice, but with effort. Texting first. Explaining too much. Making her softness understandable, so it wouldn't be mistaken for need. But invisibility doesn't ask for volume. It teaches restraint. And the more invisible she felt, the more quiet she became. Not out of weakness, but strategy. Freud believed we withdraw energy or libido from where it no longer returns. It's not punishment. It's psychic economy. The emotionally strong woman chooses silence because her unconscious finally stops investing in illusion. She isn't waiting for him to change. She's redirecting her energy toward what doesn't vanish. And the silence isn't emptiness. It's concentration. It's the invisible architecture of a woman rebuilding. He doesn't notice the silence at first, because he never listened anyway. But eventually, absence becomes its own echo. The strong woman doesn't raise her voice. She raises the stakes, not with anger, but with absence. Her silence is the mirror he can't shatter. Not because it reflects him, but because it shows he was never truly there. And when a woman sees that clearly, she stops explaining. She strategizes. Chapter 2. The Strategy of Stillness. Stillness is often misunderstood. It's mistaken for passivity. But for the emotionally strong woman, stillness is calculation, observation, mastery. Freud said, being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. And silence has made her brutally honest about what she feels, what she needs, and what she will no longer negotiate. She doesn't beg for clarity. She becomes it. She used to chase conversations, seek reassurance, interpret silences. Now she studies patterns, honors nervous system cues, and listens to her body first. Because when you're emotionally strong, you stop asking what he meant by disappearing. You start asking what part of you needed him to stay. This stillness isn't frozen. It's forged. It's built from nights of emotional overextension and mornings of realizing her voice had echoed into silence. Now, her stillness is signal. Not to him, but to herself. She doesn't need the last word. She needs the last wound to finally stop bleeding. And silence is where that healing begins. Chapter 3. When silence becomes her language. She no longer debates her worth. Not in words. Not in effort. Not even in thought. Because silence now is her native tongue. It's not a lack of response. It's an evolved form of expression. Freud believed that everything repressed returns, but transformed. And what once returned to her as tears, apologies, and hyper-vigilant caretaking now returns as distance. Not detachment, discernment. She speaks less because she knows more. And what she knows is this: emotional strength isn't shown through confrontation. It's revealed through non-participation in patterns that drain her. She could explain how it hurt, how it confused her, how it made her question what she did wrong. But why translate pain to someone fluent in silence? So she mirrors it, not in punishment but in fluency. The emotionally strong woman doesn't raise her voice. She removes her access. And in doing so, she begins to hear herself more clearly than ever before. This kind of silence is not void. It's layered. It carries meaning, history, ancestry. It carries the weight of generations of women taught to endure instead of exit. But she exits, not because she hates him, but because she finally loves herself more than the idea of being understood by him. She has learned that silence, when chosen consciously, isn't retreat. It's revolution. It dismantles the old architecture of identity, the one built on being chosen. It erects something cleaner, quieter, boundaries that no longer need defending. In silence, she has conversations with her past, with every younger version of herself who begged for crumbs, with every memory that told her love must be earned by shrinking. She tells them you can rest now. No more rehearsals. No more scripts. No more reactivity. Only presence. Only peace. Only the kind of strength that doesn't need to be declared to be known. She doesn't speak to convince anymore. She listens and finally believes what she hears inside. Chapter 4. Power without performance. There was a time she believed love was earned through emotional labor. That softness had to be proven. That staying silent would make her seem cold, and speaking too much, too needy. Now she knows better. She no longer performs proximity. No longer packages herself as palatable. Because the emotionally strong woman doesn't fear being misunderstood. She fears abandoning herself to be better understood. Freud said being entirely honest with oneself is a good exercise. And silence has made her honest. Brutally, tenderly, undeniably honest. She no longer smiles through discomfort. She no longer apologizes for her clarity. She has learned that power doesn't come from how she's received, it comes from how deeply she receives herself. There's no applause for the woman who walks away quietly. But there is liberation. And in that quiet exit, she feels it. Her power isn't louder. It's sharper. It moves differently now, not in circles of seeking, but in straight lines of self-trust. She doesn't post about her strength. She lives it. She doesn't chase resolution. She is the resolution. And if this truth resonated with you, if you felt your own silence rise not from fear but from certainty, consider liking this video. It helps more women find their voice inside their stillness. Because somewhere out there, a woman is learning that silence doesn't mean she's lost. It means she's finally home. Chapter 5. The Architecture of Emotional Strength. Emotional strength isn't loud. It isn't reactionary. It doesn't demand to be recognized. It builds quietly like a bridge, one stone at a time, across the places where her love used to drown. Freud said, the mind is like an iceberg. It floats with 1/7 of its bulk above water. And what the world sees, her calm, her quiet, her clean exits, are only the surface. Beneath that stillness is structure. She is no longer moved by impulsive need. She is moved by intuition, the kind that whispers, not this, before pain confirms it. This kind of strength doesn't need validation. It needs space. She doesn't tell the story anymore. Not to friends. Not to herself. Because she's not addicted to the drama of almost love. She's devoted to the reality of self-worth. Her silence is full of memory, but not longing. She remembers how hard she tried, how gentle she stayed, how long she hoped, and how finally she chose herself, not out of bitterness, but out of deep respect for her own nervous system. There's a quiet power in no longer narrating your pain, just breathing through it, just building from it, just becoming what you once begged someone else to see. And if this chapter found you in your own rebuilding, trust this. The woman you're becoming is not a reaction. She is the architecture of everything you once thought you had to be for someone else. Chapter 6. The Shift from Reaction to Reverence. There was a time when her silence meant suppression. She'd go quiet to avoid conflict, to seem agreeable, to keep love from slipping through her fingers. But now, her silence is reverence. Not for him, for herself. Freud wrote that the ego mediates between the ID and the superego, between raw desire and moral expectation. And she lived for years inside that battlefield, between wanting to be chosen and needing to choose herself. Her emotional strength didn't come from being emotionless. It came from recognizing when expression had become performance. When vulnerability was no longer intimacy, but entertainment for someone who had no plans to hold it. Now she speaks with caution and listens with clarity. Not everyone gets her truth. Not everyone has earned her softness. Not everyone should be given the sacred language of her becoming. She doesn't respond to provocation. She doesn't defend decisions already paid for in pain. This is the shift. From reaction, where she fought to be seen, to reverence, where she protects her peace even if no one understands it. And in this sacred quiet, she begins to hear new things. Her worth, echoing back, without needing anyone else to reflect it. This silence isn't stillness. It's selection. She is no longer waiting for the conversation that changes everything. She is already becoming the woman who no longer needs it. Chapter 7. The End of the Emotional Chase. She used to chase connection like it was oxygen. She'd decode tone, reread messages, try to guess the invisible rules of his love. She turned herself into a shape he might hold, softer here, quieter there, always folding inward to be more digestible. But the emotionally strong woman doesn't chase anymore. Freud observed that repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to repeat painful patterns, often disguises itself as love. And that's what she was doing, reliving an ache she had once normalized. Not anymore. The chase ends when she stops outsourcing her stability. Now, she reads her own energy more than his silence. She tracks the rhythms of her nervous system like scripture. She honors what contracts her and what expands her, not to be liked, but to stay aligned. She doesn't make excuses for his absence. She doesn't fill in the blanks of his avoidance with her empathy. She doesn't explain his behavior to her friends anymore, or to herself. Instead, she asks one question: does this feel like respect? And if the answer is no, she doesn't argue with it. She exits, not dramatically, not bitterly, but with the kind of stillness that terrifies men who equate silence with defeat, when really it's strategy. Her silence isn't a pause. It's punctuation. The emotional sentence ends there. And the new paragraph? It begins with her. Chapter 8. The silence between two mirrors. There's a particular moment, quiet, uncelebrated, when a woman stops imagining how it could have been. She doesn't need a better version of him anymore. She doesn't replay what she said, how she said it, whether she should have waited longer, spoken softer, stayed smaller. Freud believed we displace unbearable truths into fantasy. And her fantasy was never about him. It was about being enough. But the emotionally strong woman eventually wakes up and sees the mirror clearly. Not the mirror of his gaze, where she once tried to earn value, but the one she holds now, the one that reflects her becoming. Silence becomes sacred in this phase. Not as a weapon, but as a womb. A space where her identity gestates, no longer reactive, no longer dependent. When he doesn't reach out, she no longer spirals. She centers. She drinks her coffee slowly. She breathes fully. She notices sunlight and sensation, and the gift of not being entangled in someone else's emotional volatility. She no longer looks for herself in someone else's eyes. She's found herself in her own. And here's the irony. When she's no longer waiting, that's when he feels it. Her absence isn't an empty room. It's a room filled with the life she built without him. Because silence isn't distance. It's distinction. The moment she stops explaining who she is, and starts becoming her, uninterrupted. Chapter 9. The boundary beneath her silence. Some boundaries are spoken. Others are enacted through silence, not as withdrawal, but as definition. Freud said that the ego's job is to defend the individual from both internal anxiety and external threat. And for the emotionally strong woman, silence has become her boundary. A border drawn not with barbed wire, but with self-regard. She no longer teaches men how to love her by over-explaining what they keep stepping on. She simply leaves the room, not because she's given up, but because she's woken up. To the cost, to the pattern, to the slow erosion of self that happens when love must be begged for. Her silence doesn't say, "Come back." It says, "This space is no longer yours to enter." What once was porous is now precise. She honors her instincts now. The tightening in her chest when a message lacks care. The confusion that once felt like chemistry, now felt as warning. She doesn't doubt her discernment anymore. And because of that, she says less. She knows that real intimacy doesn't require repeated explanation. Real intimacy meets you in the silence and offers presence, not puzzles. So she no longer opens her heart in places that cannot hold it. Her silence is not a dare. It's a doorway to a life where love feels like clarity, not performance, not pursuit, not persuasion. Chapter 10. When silence becomes his teacher. At first, he doesn't notice. He assumes her silence is temporary, a pause in a play, not the end of the performance. He's used to women waiting, hoping, orbiting. But she's no longer circling. She's gone still, and not in anger, but in arrival. Freud believed that we resist truth because it threatens our identity. And for him, her silence threatens the role he once played, the one who mattered more when he said less. The one whose absence was supposed to be power. But now, her absence is louder than his silence ever was. She doesn't reach out, doesn't reply late at night, doesn't soften when he sends breadcrumbs dressed as remorse. Because the emotionally strong woman no longer confuses guilt with intimacy. Her silence doesn't invite conversation. It reveals contrast. He begins to feel it, not her rejection but her release. And in that space, he meets something rare. Consequence. Not the kind that screams or blames, but the kind that simply doesn't return. She doesn't ask him to grow. But somehow, her absence does. It makes him look. At himself. At the way he loved. At the ways he disappeared without physically leaving. He may never tell her. May never find the words. But that's the point. The emotionally strong woman doesn't need closure. She became it. And now, her silence teaches more than any explanation ever could. Chapter 11. The New Sound of Strength. The emotionally strong woman doesn't just disappear. She redefines presence. Not the kind of presence that waits to be chosen, but the kind that knows she already belongs to herself, to her peace, to her future. Freud spoke of sublimation, the redirection of instinctual energy into higher, more constructive expressions. And this is her now. She's no longer tethered to proving her pain. She's creating from it. Her silence is not retreat. It's repurposing. She writes. She works. She heals. She stops trying to be understood by those committed to confusion. There is a richness in her life now that silence carves space for. Conversations that nourish. Mornings that don't start in fight or flight. Desires that don't get diluted by fear. She no longer fantasizes about being rescued. She is the rescue. This isn't about being above emotion, it's about rising with it, holding it, honoring it, and knowing exactly when to walk away without guilt. She speaks less, but when she does, it's seismic. Not loud, but unmistakable. She doesn't need to be everything to be enough. And her strength isn't something she flaunts. It's something she lives. Chapter 12, The Self That Silence Protected. Silence isn't what she chose. It's what remained when she chose herself. She didn't want to go quiet. She wanted to be met, to be understood without audition, to feel the presence of a man whose absence she didn't have to decode. But some silences aren't surrender. They're strategy. Freud once noted that repression acts like a dam, building pressure until the mind must redirect or break. And her silence, it redirected everything she once gave away. Attention, energy, affection. She doesn't replay old conversations anymore. She doesn't analyze what she could have said to make him stay. Because she's realized the self she became while waiting for his reciprocity was never the self she was meant to be. The emotionally strong woman no longer needs validation to believe what her body has already spoken. The tightness in her chest, the confusion in his patterns, the exhaustion of trying to love someone who hides behind detachment. Now she listens inward. She pours into her creativity, her solitude, her friendships that hold her without performance. She trusts the quiet because she's made peace with who she is within it. Silence protected something sacred, her becoming. And what she's becoming now isn't a woman hardened by pain, but a woman so in tune with herself she no longer mistakes inconsistency for mystery. She simply walks away, because when you finally meet yourself fully, you stop waiting to be met halfway. Chapter 13, The Life That Waited Beyond the Noise. What she thought she'd lose by going silent, she found tenfold in peace. No more over-explaining her tone. No more shrinking to avoid his silence. No more mistaking withdrawal for wisdom. She has stepped into a life that doesn't demand her constant proving. One that welcomes her with ease, with enoughness. Freud said, words have a magical power. They can bring either the greatest happiness or deepest despair. And she knows now, her silence has been a spell. One that broke the loop. One that summoned a world beyond needing to be chosen. She chooses herself now, not in theory but in rhythm, in the decisions she makes daily, in what she no longer tolerates, in how she no longer explains away discomfort. There are no fireworks here, just mornings with her own breath, friends who don't require translation, a mirror that reflects someone she finally recognizes, not as the girl who waited, but as the woman who walked. This is not the silence of exile. It is the silence of return, to joy, to clarity, to relationships that mirror rather than deplete. And if he ever thinks of her voice, her softness, her retreat, he won't remember the words. He'll remember how her absence taught him what her presence made easy to ignore. Because this is what emotionally strong women do. They don't yell to be heard. They disappear to be seen. Chapter 14, The Woman Who Didn't Need to Prove It. She no longer looks back. Not because it didn't matter, but because it taught her everything she needed to know. Freud said, we choose not randomly each other. We meet only those who already exist in our subconscious. And now she understands, he wasn't a mistake. He was a mirror, a lesson, a catalyst. And her silence, it wasn't an ending. It was a decision. The final punctuation to a story she no longer needed to tell. The emotionally strong woman is not made of stone. She is made of scar tissue and sovereignty. She cried. She stayed too long. She hoped. And then she woke up. And that awakening doesn't need to be advertised. It's lived in how she carries herself now. In how she no longer explains what someone failed to value. In how she no longer waits for apology, clarity, or recognition. Because the most powerful transformation isn't loud. It's when a woman becomes so whole, so anchored, so devoted to her own truth, that being misunderstood no longer costs her anything. This is her strength. Quiet, strategic, final. And if this story resonated, if you've walked that same silent bridge from pain to power, consider liking and subscribing. Somewhere, another woman might need to hear what you just lived through. Let your silence be seen. Let your story begin. Thank you for being here.